This tutorial is brought to you by Hey, what's up guys? My name is Josh Inobakare and welcome to Olufemi Tutorials. Now guys, you may look at the title of this video and say, I know everything. I know everything there is to know. This is elementary stuff. It may be. I'll tell you though, there's a lot of people in the industry that I've worked with, that I've hired, that honestly, for some reason, do not know these basic principles. It may be you, it may not be. Today we're going to be talking about exposure. Exposure is referring to how bright or how dark your footage is going to be. It's crucial that when you're capturing your footage that you capture it with perfect exposure, meaning that your footage is neither too bright or too dark. Now, in order to capture exposure, you use all three of the pillars of exposure to get your exposure just right. The three pillars of exposure are aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Anytime you adjust any of the three pillars of exposure, whether it be your shutter speed, your ISO, or your aperture, there's a thing on your camera called your exposure meter that's going to go from the right to the left. Right in the middle, it's like a notch that's like a little bit thicker than the other notches, is the perfect exposure. If your point that's moving, right or left, goes to the right of that notch, your footage is overexposed. You can see the numbers on the right of the notch get bigger, +1, +2, +3. If your little blinking point goes to the left of that middle notch, you'll see the numbers go down to -1, -2, -3. You know that your footage is now underexposed. So you want to try to stay right in the middle of that notch. Now check this out. It's going to be your exposure meter that you're going to be using and clinging onto to maintain that perfect exposure. Say you're outside and it's the middle of the day, and usually what you may try to do is you may try to look at the LCD screen on your camera and judge by eye. Okay, that doesn't look too bright, or that doesn't look too dark. What that's going to do is, if you just totally go by eye, it's going to completely screw up your exposure. Because what's going to happen is the LED screen is going to look a lot darker than normal when the direct sunlight is hitting it, and you're going to come back into the normally lit room of your wherever you're editing, and you're going to realize that all of your exposure is that you basically all your footage is overexposed. So what you need to do is you need to focus on the exposure meter. The exposure meter is the only thing you should trust in most situations. Don't trust your eye looking at your LCD screen. Okay guys, check this out. There's actually a situation where the exposure meter will actually not give you proper exposure. And guess what? It's actually the situation that I'm in right now. What you see here is that I'm in an environment with a lot of bright areas and a lot of dark areas. The window behind me is very bright, but me on the other hand, I'm actually very dark. I'm in a shadow right now. And what the exposure meter is going to do is the exposure meter takes the average of all the pixels within this frame that we're filming, and it tries to create the perfect exposure for all of the pixels. Now, what that's saying is that obviously it's not going to work, right? If you expose the window behind me so it's perfectly exposed, so it's not too bright, I'm then going to be underexposed. I'm going to be too dark. If you expose if you expose me so that I'm perfectly exposed, like hopefully I am now, then that window is going to be blown out. It's going to be way too bright, which it is. So this is what you got to do. You got to realize that when the exposure meter is right in the middle, in a case like this, it's most likely that I'm going to be a little bit darker than I should be, because this crazy bright window is kind of throwing off the balance. So what I need to do is I need to take this into account, that I have a really bright window behind me. So I need to bump up the exposure so that the little dot, instead of being right in the middle, actually goes a little bit onto the plus part of the ticked line, because I want to make sure that I actually do blow that window out a little bit so that I am not too dark. in order to make sure that you have the perfect exposure dialed in, you're actually going to need something called a light meter, which allows you to specify the specific points in the frame that you want to expose. So with a light meter, you'd be able to say, I only want to expose for Josh, for me. I don't want to expose for the window. If you're using the light meter on your camera, you're just taking kind of an average of all the pixels. So for now, we only have a light meter on the camera, and we just got to take that into account and almost kind of guesstimate. Thanks for watching, guys.